Hello folks, I want to do a quick video for you on the muscles of the face and the head. And remember in lab, we're going to be concerned with a couple of things. We're going to name the muscle. So we want to be able to identify a muscle on any of these images. We want to be able to name the insertion of the muscle. So the bone, typically that's the bone that is moving when the muscle contracts, or the bone that moves when the muscle contracts. And the origin of the muscle. This is the bone that's stationary when the muscle contracts. And then the action of the muscle. So is it flexion at a joint, abduction at a joint, adduction, rotation, that sort of thing. Okay, so we'll do the head and neck first. Get Body Smart is pretty good for most of the muscles of the body except for the face and the head region. So we're using this zygote body, and I'll post this on our lab site as well. We'll just go from, so I'm using our lab supplement for our muscles, and just under all the learning outcomes and keywords, you have the table that lists all the names of the muscles that you need to know for lab. So I'm just going to go down that list of names for the head and neck, and we'll identify them here, and then we'll see their origin, insertion, and their mechanism of action. The other study tool that's going to be really useful, Krieger, of course, is great, and that's chapter 9, I think, in Krieger, the lab manual, but your textbook is also excellent, and tables, 11.2 and 11.3 and 11.4 through 7, all of the tables in that chapter 11 in your textbook are really useful for summarizing all of this, the name of the muscle, the origin, insertion, and the mechanism of action. It even has innervation of the muscle too. Okay. So the first one is it's called the occipitofrontalis because it has two parts to it. You might also see it called the epicranius. So here is the occipitofrontalis. This is the frontal belly. And if we flip it around, there's a broad sheath of tendon here. This broad sheath of tendon is called the aponeurosis. And the aponeurosis is a general term, but specifically this is the aponeurosis of the epicranius. And then here's the occipital belly of the occipitofrontalis. Okay, so for the frontal belly of the occipitofrontalis, that one originates, on the epicranial aponeurosis. So the origin of the frontal belly is up here, right, on this epicranial aponeurosis, right? And then the insertion of it is down here on the, you can see the skin of the eyebrows and the bridge of the nose, right? So it's a pretty superficial muscle. It's controlling facial expression. So it's inserting on the skin, right? And then if we go to the occipital belly, its origin is on the occipital bone. So down here is the occipital bone, right? So its origin is on the occipital bone, and that wraps all the way around even to the kind of the mastoid region. So just above the mastoid region, but basically all along the base of the occipital. And then the insertion is on the epicranial aponeurosis, right? So right here, the insertion's right here. So it originates here and inserts here. The action of this part of the muscle is to tense and retract the scalp, so to pull the scalp backward, right? So it pulls the scalp back. And then the action of the frontal belly of the occipitofrontalis is to pull the eyebrows up, so raise the eyebrows and wrinkling up the forehead. But it's again, a muscle of facial expression. So we don't have bones moving here, we have skin moving, right? Okay, next is the orbicularis oculi. So this is our orbicularis oculi. It's on both sides, right? You can see it's basically a concentric muscle that encircles the eye, the orbit of the eye. This one again is inserting basically on skin. So the orbicularis oculi oh, has an origin here on the medial margin of the orbit. So this is the origin here, right? And then the insertion is basically the skin all around the eyelids here, right? And so what happens, the action of this muscle is, as it is for all concentric muscles, where the fibers are basically going in a ring. If you shorten those fibers, right, they're basically going in a ring. If you shorten those fibers, they do that. So this action of this muscle is to close the eyes, right? So that's our orbicularis oculi. Orbicular, right? It's round, and oculi, it goes around the ocular region. Here's another orbicularis. This is the orbicularis oris, right? So another orbicular goes around the lips. Basically, it's the major muscle of the lips, and oris in the oral region, right? So that's the orbicularis oris. This one has its origins on the maxilla and the mandible. So up here on the maxilla, and I don't know if we really see the origins on the maxilla, and then on the mandible down here, and then the insertion is the corner of the, oh, sorry, I said that wrong. Let's start over. The orbicularis oris, yeah, does have its origin on the maxilla and the mandible, but its origin is here at, or its insertion is here at the corners, is here at the lips, right? So we have its origin at the maxilla and the mandible, and then it's kind of inserting here on the lips, so that when you shorten this muscle, contract this muscle, it basically purses the lips. So it kind of does that, right? When you shorten it. Okay. Then we have the zygomaticus major and minor. These muscles are controlling the movement of the mouth backward, basically, right? The retraction of the lips. So this is our, sorry, let's click off of that. Here's our two. This is the major because it's larger. This is the minor because it's a smaller muscle. So this is the zygomaticus major, right? Our zygomaticus major has its origin on the zygomatic bone up here, kind of near to the suture with the maxilla. And then it has its insertion at the angle of the mouth, right? So right here is the insertion. So it helps to when you contract that muscle to retract the lips, right? Elevate the corners of the mouth like in a smile, right? And then here's the zygomaticus minor, right? So right there on either side, that's the zygomaticus minor. And the minor also has its origin on the zygomatic bone, but it has its insertion here on the upper lip, right? And so this helps to retract and elevate the upper lip. So it kind of raises the upper lip in a sneer, right? So that motion is the zygomaticus minor. So that's its action. Then we've got some muscles of the mouth and moving around and masticating. So we have the buccinator. It's a deep muscle. This is the buccinator, right? So you can see it's pretty deep here. This is actually an important muscle for controlling the tongue, and for us, for all mammals, it's important in the sucking response during infancy. So our buccinator is originating on the alveolar processes of the mandible. So basically at the base of the teeth of the maxilla, of the maxilla and the mandible, right? So kind of the base of the teeth on the inside, right? The inside of the jaw. And that can you see the mandible would be right here, right? And so they'd be inserting on the inside. Let's see if we can actually, Yeah, our mandible's in there, just hard to see it, right? So the inside of the mandible and maxilla. And then it's inserting there on the tongue, or sorry, on the lips, right? So the insertion is into the orbicularis oris, right? Okay, and that helps to compress the cheeks, right? So that's important for our suckling response. So it helps to do this. You can see the cheeks moving in. The buccinator is doing that. Okay. Then we have our temporalis. These are our this is a big chewing muscle. So you might guess it's got its origin on the temporal bone. So kind of on the parietal and temporal. So this is our temporalis muscle, right? Um, the origin of our temporalis and our masseter are important for thinking about how chewing occurs. Okay, so I've jumped over to Get Body Smart, that website, to show you the temporalis and the masseter. So this is our temporalis muscle. Well, as we step through here, we're going to sort of pull away the mandible, and we'll see there are other chewing muscles in here. And this is just showing now the temporalis, right? So origin up here and insertion down on the coronoid process of the mandible. But let's look at that a little more closely. So it's basically the origin is on the temporal bone, the temporal fossa of the temporal bone, the fascia that surrounds it, and so that's our origin, right? Then the insertion is the tip of the coronoid process and the sort of medial surface of the mandible. So if we, there we go, this is our insertion, right? So the inside, the medial portion of the coronoid process and the tip of the coronoid process, that's the insertion. So you can guess that when this thing contracts, right, it's lifting the mandible, it's raising the mandible. So it's really important in that biting motion, that motion of biting down. I'll just pop back over here and see if we can kind of see our temporalis, right? Inserting on the inside of our mandible is here. So it's inserting on the top of the coronoid process and the internal margin of it. Okay. Then we have our masseter. This is originating on the inside uh, of our zygomatic arch and inserting on our mandible, the outer portion or the outside of our mandible. So here you can kind of see it inserting on the mandible, and its origin is on the internal portion of the zygomatic arch. So let's jump over to see that. Here's the masseter, right? And you can see it there kind of diving in underneath the zygomatic arch, right? Both on the temporal and zygomatic part of it, and then on the outer margin or the lateral portion and base of the angle of the masseter, right? So there's our origin. This is kind of nice the way they lay that out. They just pull the muscle off. You can see the origin, and there's the insertion, right? So this is another one that's important for chewing, but this one is sort of, you can see drawing, when this would contracts, it's sort of drawing the jaw upward, right? So it's important in the biting motion, but also important for aligning the jaw and then grinding the teeth, right, when you get it shut. So if you feel right here and grit your teeth, you can feel your masseter bulging out, right? So elevating and protracting the mandible to close the jaw, and there's a little example of it, but also helping to grind those teeth, right? And if we jump back to the temporalis, let's see if we get a nice version of the temporalis kind of showing, whoops, that's the masseter, isn't it? No, it's showing, it's showing the masseter again. Interesting, not the temporalis. Okay. But the temporalis is important for that same biting motion. And you can feel that one up here. If you go to the temporal and you bite down and squeeze, you can feel your temporalis bulging out the side of your skull. Okay, lastly, we have it's kind of a muscle that moves the head more than controls any of the chewing or facial expression, and that's the sternocleidomastoid. So that one's here. You can see it has its origin on the manubrium of the sternum as well as the clavicle. That's where the sternocleido comes from in the name, sternocleido. And then mastoid is the insertion point here of so the sternocleidomastoid inserts kind of on the mastoid region of the skull, right? And then even a little bit further back too. And so the insertion is just below the origin of the, whoops, where did my muscles go? The origin of the occipitofrontalis, right? So there's our sternocleidomastoid. You can tell then when this muscle is contracted, you see this kind of angle that it makes, right? When that muscle is contracted, it draws the head, it flexes the head towards the neck, but it also draws it to one side. So if I'm contracting this sternocleidomastoid, it's going to do that, flex my head towards the neck, close that angle, but also turn it to one side. And the same goes for this other side. If I were to contract this sternocleidomastoid, it would turn my head as well as flex it, right? Flex my head at the neck. Okay. So those are the muscles of the face, head, and neck. And I will see you again in a future video to talk about the muscles of the back, shoulders, and chest, and then we'll get further down into the thorax and ribs and abdominal region. Please let me know if you have any questions about this.